All right, this is Block 4 over there, Section 5, the Treaty of Versailles, and the section starting with the 14 points. President Wilson, in early 1918, tries to explain to the American people that the war that they were fighting was a war with a moral cause, as well as kind of an active military cause. And he gives this speech in January of 1918 that came to be known as the 14 Points speech. And you see up on the board 6 points that kind of pull together what Wilson's 14 points were all about. So let's quickly go through them. The first thing that Wilson argued for was that there should be, in diplomacy, no secret alliances. Everybody in the world should know who is allied with who, against who, with who, that there should be no secret deals, secret understandings, things done under the table, etc., etc. So Wilson's first point was no secret alliances. The second point that Wilson made was that the seas should be free for everybody. That freedom of the seas, freedom for shipping and merchant trade and all that sort of stuff should be open to everyone, that blockades were illegal, and all things like that. All nations should have access, that had access to the sea, should have freedom of the seas. The third thing that Wilson wanted was a reduction of trade barriers. He wanted more free trade between countries, a reduction of tariffs, a reduction of taxes on imports and exports. The fourth point that Wilson made was a reduction of armaments, that the nations of the world should reduce the size of their armies and reduce the size of their navies, and by 1918 reduce the size of their air forces to the minimum required by domestic security. That Wilson and progressives like him believed that the bigger armies were, and the bigger navies were, the more chance of war that there was. The fifth thing that Wilson noted in his 14 points is the concept of self-determination. Self-determination is a very important idea. Self-determination means that the people who live in a particular area should get to determine for themselves their own government. This is obviously a very anti-imperialistic idea, that if you have self-determination, you cannot possibly have colonies. But Wilson believed that the point of the war was to increase as much as possible self-determination, both for colonial peoples and for people in those multi-ethnic European empires, like the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Ottoman Empire, for example. And the sixth of the 14 points is Wilson's baby. Is the thing that this entire section is going to be about. This is the nearest and dearest thing to President Wilson's heart. When you think of President Wilson, the first thing you should think of is number 6, a League of Nations. A group of nations, a League of Nations, whose purpose it was to protect, to have mutual guarantees of political independence and territorial integrity to great and small nations alike. And what that basically meant was a group of countries that got together and promised to respect each other's political independence and territorial integrity. Almost like the United Nations. The United Nations is the successor to Wilson's League of Nations. These 14 points are the points by which the Germans agreed to surrender in November of 1918. And when President Wilson goes to Europe to help negotiate the peace treaty, he goes in hand with these 14 points, saying that if we establish these 14 points, this war truly will have been a war to end the war. And it will be the last time that the human race is cursed with the specter of mass industrial conflict like it had been. This is Wilson's baby, especially the League of Nations. Now, in order to get this through, Wilson needed help in Congress, because any treaty, as you know, has to, or as you should know, has to be approved by 2/3 of the Senate. In the congressional elections of 1918, in November of 1918, Wilson begs the country to elect Democrats that will help him pass these 14 points and give him support when he goes off to Europe to negotiate the treaty. However, the country is not particularly interested in listening to President Wilson, and they do not necessarily elect a Congress full of Democrats. In fact, Wilson actually has a minority in the Senate and a small, tiny, tiny majority in the House. So in reality, while Wilson asks for a Democratic majority for the purpose of creating the peace treaty, in reality, what he gets is divided government, that the Republicans are going to have a say in what happens next.